Elena Volkov stepped off the dusty train platform in Cedar Falls, Montana, clutching her single worn suitcase with trembling fingers. The September wind whipped through her thin shawl, carrying the scent of pine trees and something she couldn't quite identify. Freedom, perhaps, or maybe just the unfamiliar smell of American soil. At 19, she had traveled further from home than she had ever imagined possible, leaving behind the gray streets of her Russian village for a life she could barely comprehend. The letter in her coat pocket crinkled as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She had read Thomas Mitchell's words so many times that she could recite them from memory. He was 32 years old, owned a ranch outside Cedar Falls, and needed a wife to help him manage his household. His handwriting was neat and careful, suggesting an educated man, and his photograph showed kind eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat. But photographs could lie, Elena knew, just as letters could paint pictures that had nothing to do with reality. A tall figure emerged from the small crowd gathered near the station house. Elena recognized him immediately, though he looked somehow larger in person than she had imagined. Thomas Mitchell removed his hat as he approached, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and those same kind eyes she had studied in his photograph. His clothes were clean but well-worn, the clothes of a working man who took pride in his appearance without putting on airs. "Miss Volkov?" His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a gentleness that surprised her. "I'm Thomas Mitchell." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. The English words felt clumsy in her mouth, though she had practiced them during the long journey from New York. "Yes, I am Elena." In quote, Thomas reached for her suitcase, and their fingers brushed briefly as she handed it over. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she quickly pulled her hand away. He seemed to notice her reaction but made no comment, simply gesturing toward a wagon parked nearby. "The ranch is about an hour's drive," he said as he helped her up onto the wooden seat. "I thought you might like to see the town first, though. Get your bearings." Elena wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as Thomas climbed up beside her. The wagon lurched forward, and she gripped the edge of the seat to steady herself. Cedar Falls spread out before them, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets that seemed impossibly small after the crowded cities she had passed through on her journey west. But there was something appealing about the town's modest size, something that made her think she might not feel quite so lost here. "That's the general store." Thomas pointed to a building with a wide front porch. "Mrs. Patterson runs it with her husband. She's been asking about you ever since I mentioned you were coming." "Asking about me? Well, you're the first mail-order bride to come to Cedar Falls in quite some time. People are curious." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had not considered that her arrival would be a subject of local interest. In her village, such arrangements were common enough, born of necessity rather than romance. But here, in this small American town, she was apparently something of a novelty. They passed a white church with a tall steeple, a schoolhouse with children's voices drifting from the open windows, and several houses with neat gardens and picket fences. Thomas narrated their route with the patient tone of someone accustomed to explaining things to newcomers. But Elena found herself watching his hands more than listening to his words. They were strong hands, calloused from work but gentle as they held the reins. When they left the town behind, the landscape opened into rolling hills covered with grass that had turned golden in the autumn air. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with snow that gleamed white against the blue sky. Elena had never seen such vast open spaces, and despite her nervousness, she felt her spirits lift slightly. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Thomas glanced at her, and she caught something that might have been relief in his expression. "I hoped you'd think so. It can seem pretty empty to folks who aren't used to it." "No, not empty, just big." They fell into comfortable silence as the wagon rolled along the dirt road. Elena found herself stealing glances at Thomas when she thought he wasn't looking. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a jaw that suggested stubbornness. But when he caught her looking and smiled, his entire face softened in a way that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. The Mitchell Ranch appeared as they crested a small hill. Elena saw a modest two-story house, with a wraparound porch, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings scattered around a yard that was larger than her entire family's property back home. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward the mountains, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. "Home," Thomas said simply. As they pulled up to the house, a woman emerged from the front door. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and flour dusting the front of her apron. Her expression was reserved but not unfriendly as she watched Elena climb down from the wagon. "This is Mrs. Henderson," Thomas explained. "She's been helping me keep house since my mother passed." "Mrs. Henderson." "This is Elena." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward and extended her hand. "Welcome to Cedar Falls, my dear. I'm sure you're tired from your journey." "Thank you." Elena shook the offered hand, grateful for the woman's straightforward manner. "Yes. Very tired. I've prepared the spare room for you," Mrs. Henderson continued. "You'll want to freshen up before supper, I imagine." Elena looked between Thomas and Mrs. Henderson, confusion creeping into her expression. "Spare room?" Thomas cleared his throat, and Elena noticed that his cheeks had reddened slightly. "I thought you might be more comfortable having your own space for now, until we get to know each other better." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Elena was only beginning to understand. In her correspondence with Thomas, they had discussed the practical aspects of their arrangement marriage, household duties, the legal formalities that would allow her to remain in America, but they had never spoken about the more intimate aspects of what their union would entail. Mrs. Henderson seemed to sense the awkwardness of the moment. "Come along, dear," she said briskly, taking Elena's arm. "Let's get you settled." The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt and a window that looked out over the pastures. Elena set her suitcase on the bed and turned to find Mrs. Henderson watching her with shrewd but kind eyes. "He's a good man," the older woman said without preamble. "Thomas Mitchell is as honest as they come, and he'll treat you right. But I imagine this is all quite overwhelming." Elena sank down onto the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the full weight of her situation. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she admitted. "In my letters, everything seemed so clear, but now you're here. And it's all real." Mrs. Henderson sat down beside her. "That's natural enough. Big changes always feel impossible until you're living them. What if I can't be the wife he needs? What if I don't know how to live in this place?" Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment, studying Elena's face. "What did you leave behind in Russia?" "Nothing good." The words came out more bitter than Elena had intended. "My father died when I was 16. My mother remarried a man who—" She trailed off, not wanting to speak aloud the memories that had driven her to answer Thomas's advertisement. "There was nothing left for me there. And what do you hope to find here?" Elena looked out the window at the golden grass moving in the wind. "Safety, I suppose. A chance to make something of myself. Those are good things to hope for." Mrs. Henderson patted Elena's hand. "And Thomas is hoping for companionship. Someone to share his life with. His parents died within a year of each other, and he's been alone on this ranch ever since. Loneliness can eat a person alive out here." That evening, Elena joined Thomas and Mrs. Henderson for supper around a table in the kitchen. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables from the garden behind the house. Thomas asked polite questions about her journey, and Elena found herself relaxing as they talked. His manner was gentle and patient, never pressing when she struggled to find the right English words. After supper, Mrs. Henderson retired to her own small house near the barn, leaving Thomas and Elena alone for the first time. They sat on the front porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I want you to know," Thomas said carefully, "that I don't expect anything from you right away. This arrangement marriage, it doesn't have to happen immediately if you're not ready." Elena looked at him in surprise. "But the papers you signed, the money you sent for my passage, I know what the agreement was." "But you're not property, Elena. You're a person with feelings and thoughts of your own." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'd rather have a wife who wants to be here than one who stays out of obligation." The sincerity in his voice made something tight in Elena's chest begin to loosen. For the first time since leaving Russia, she felt that she might have made the right choice. "Thank you," she said softly. "I was so afraid." "Of what?" Elena hesitated, then decided on honesty. "That you would be like my stepfather. That you would think you owned me because you paid my way here." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" The question was asked quietly. But Elena heard the steel beneath the words. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "He'll never touch you again," Thomas said firmly. "You're safe here, Elena. I give you my word." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Elena found herself studying Thomas's profile in the dim light from the house windows. There was something solid about him, something that made her think he was a man who kept his promises. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "Now we get to know each other. See if we suit." Thomas turned to look at her. "Would you like to see more of the ranch tomorrow? Learn how things work around here?" Elena nodded. "Yes, I would like that." As she prepared for bed in the spare room later that night, Elena found herself thinking about the way Thomas had looked at her during supper. Not with the calculating gaze she was accustomed to from men, but with genuine interest in what she had to say. It was a new feeling, being seen as something more than just a burden or a convenience. She had come to Cedar Falls expecting to trade one form of servitude for another, albeit a more comfortable one. But as she lay in the narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the American countryside, Elena began to wonder if she might have found something else entirely, the possibility of a real partnership with a man who seemed to value her as a person, rather than just a solution to his practical needs. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had spent so many years protecting herself from hope that she wasn't sure she remembered how to trust in the possibility of happiness. But Thomas Mitchell's gentle manner and respectful treatment had planted a seed of something that felt dangerously close to optimism in her heart. Outside her window, an owl called softly in the darkness, and Elena pulled the quilt up to her chin, allowing herself to imagine what it might be like to build a life in this vast, beautiful place with a man who seemed to understand that true partnership required patience, respect, and choice. Elena woke to the sound of voices outside her window and the rich smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back: the train, the wagon ride, Thomas's kind eyes, and the promise of safety that had seemed almost too good to believe. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress and made her way downstairs, following the sound of conversation. In the kitchen, she found Thomas seated at the table with Mrs. Henderson and two men she didn't recognize. All three men rose when she entered, and Thomas stepped forward with a smile that seemed to come more easily this morning. "Good morning, Elena. I hope you slept well." He gestured toward the two strangers. "These are my neighbors, Jake Morrison and his son Peter. They stopped by to welcome you to the area." Jake Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His son Peter appeared to be close to Elena's own age, with sandy hair and an easy smile that lingered perhaps a moment too long as he took her hand. "Mighty pleased to meet you, Miss Volkov," Peter said, his voice warm with genuine interest. "Welcome to Cedar Falls." "Thank you." Elena accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Henderson and took a seat at the table, acutely aware of the way Peter's gaze followed her movements. "The Morrisons have the spread just east of here," Thomas explained. "Jake and I help each other out during busy seasons." "Speaking of which," Jake said, settling back into his chair, "we're going to need all hands for the cattle drive next week, moving the herd to winter pasture before the weather turns." Thomas nodded. "I'll be there. How many days do you think?" 3, maybe 4 if we run into trouble." Jake glanced at Elena. "Hope you won't mind being without your husband for a few days so soon after arriving." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the word husband. Thomas caught her expression and quickly clarified. "We haven't actually married yet. Elena and I are still getting acquainted." An awkward silence fell over the kitchen. Peter broke it by turning to Elena with renewed interest. "Well, if you find yourself with time on your hands while Thomas is away, I'd be happy to show you around the area. There's some beautiful country around here that most folks never get to see. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained level. That's kind of you, Peter. But I'm sure Elena will be plenty busy learning about the ranch. After the Morrisons left, Thomas showed Elena around the property. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the pastures. Elena had never seen so much open space, and despite the uncertainty of her situation, she felt her spirits lift as they walked. "This is where we keep the chickens," Thomas said, opening the gate to a fenced yard where dozens of brown and white hens pecked at the ground. "Mrs. Henderson usually tends them, but it would be helpful if you could learn to collect the eggs." Elena nodded eagerly. "I know how to care for chickens. We had them at home." Thomas showed her the vegetable garden, the tool shed, and the smokehouse where meat was preserved for winter. At the barn, he introduced her to his horses, a gentle mare named Daisy, and a spirited black stallion called Thunder. Elena had ridden as a child in Russia, and she found herself drawn to the horses despite her nervousness around the larger animals. "Would you like to learn to ride?" Thomas asked, noticing her interest. "Could I?" "Of course. Daisy's as gentle as they come, and it would give you more freedom to explore the area on your own." They spent the morning working together, Thomas patiently explaining the daily routines while Elena tried to absorb everything. She was surprised by how much she enjoyed the physical work, feeding animals, collecting eggs, helping to mend a section of fence that had been damaged by wind. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something tangible to the household. As the days passed, Elena found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she had expected. Mrs. Henderson taught her to cook American-style meals, and Elena shared some of her Russian recipes in return. Thomas included her in discussions about ranch business, asking for her opinions on matters both large and small. Slowly, Elena began to feel less like a guest and more like a genuine partner in the enterprise. But it was the quiet moments that affected her most deeply. Thomas had a habit of reading in the evenings, and he began sharing his books with Elena, patiently helping her with unfamiliar English words. They would sit together on the front porch after supper, talking about everything from farming techniques to their childhood memories. Elena found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she cared to admit. Thomas, for his part, seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. He asked thoughtful questions about her life in Russia, listening without judgment when she spoke about the hardships she had endured. When she struggled to express something in English, he waited patiently for her to find the words rather than rushing to finish her sentences. It was a kindness Elena had rarely experienced, and she found herself beginning to trust him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. The attraction between them grew stronger with each passing day. Elena caught herself watching Thomas as he worked, admiring the easy strength of his movements and the careful way he treated the animals. Sometimes she would look up to find him watching her as well, his expression soft and thoughtful. But neither of them acted on the growing tension between them, as if they both understood that too much haste could destroy the delicate foundation they were building. Then Peter Morrison began visiting more frequently. He always had plausible reasons, bringing news from town, delivering supplies, asking Thomas's advice about some aspect of ranch management. But Elena noticed that his visits grew longer, and that he always seemed to find excuses to linger when Thomas was busy with other tasks. "You're settling in well," Peter said one afternoon as Elena hung laundry on the line behind the house. Thomas had ridden out to check on the cattle in the far pastures and wouldn't return until evening. "Thank you. Everyone has been very kind." Peter moved closer, ostensibly to help her with a sheet that had gotten tangled in the wind. "It must be difficult, though, being in a strange place with someone you barely know." Elena glanced at him sharply. There was something in his tone that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. "Thomas has been very good to me," she said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure he has. Thomas is a decent man." Peter's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "But decency isn't everything, is it? A woman needs to feel valued, appreciated. She needs to know that she's truly wanted, not just convenient." Elena felt her cheeks burn with indignation. "I should return to the house. Mrs. Henderson will be wondering where I am." Peter caught her arm gently as she turned to go. I didn't mean to upset you. I just want you to know that you have options, Elena. If things don't work out with Thomas, you're not trapped here. Elena pulled her arm free, anger flashing in her eyes. What are you suggesting, Mr. Morrison? Just that you deserve to be with someone who chose you because he wanted you. Not because he needed a housekeeper he could marry to make it respectable. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Was that how people saw her arrangement with Thomas? Was that all she was to him? A convenient solution to his domestic needs? That's enough. Thomas's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Neither Elena nor Peter had heard him approach, but now he stood just a few feet away, his expression thunderous. I think you'd better leave, Peter. Peter raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. Now, Thomas, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just making conversation with Elena here. By suggesting that I'm using her? Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. By implying that she's somehow less than she is? Oh. By implying that she's somehow less than she is? Oh, I never said that. You didn't have to. Thomas stepped closer to Peter, and though he was not a particularly large man, something in his manner made Peter take a step backward. Elena is a guest in my home, and will soon be my wife. Any disrespect shown to her is disrespect shown to me. Peter's easy smile faltered. I think you're misunderstanding my intentions, Thomas. No, I understand them perfectly. Thomas's gaze was steady and implacable. And if I see you on my property again without a specific invitation, we're going to have a problem. Peter looked between Thomas and Elena, then shrugged as if the entire conversation had been of no importance. If that's how you want it. He touched the brim of his hat in Elena's direction. Ma'am, I hope you'll be very happy. After Peter rode away, Thomas and Elena stood in awkward silence. Elena felt humiliated by the conversation and uncertain about what Thomas might have overheard. Did he think she had encouraged Peter's attention? Did he agree with Peter's assessment of their arrangement? I'm sorry about that, Thomas said finally. Peter had no right to speak to you that way. Did you hear everything he said? Thomas nodded grimly. Enough. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm afternoon sun. Is that what people think? That you only wanted me for convenience? Thomas was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Does it matter what other people think? It matters to me. Thomas turned to look at her directly. When I first wrote to that agency back east, it was because I was lonely and tired of eating my own cooking. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. But from the moment you stepped off that train, Elena, this hasn't been about convenience. Then what has it been about? I don't know. The honesty in his admission surprised her. I just know that watching you learn to gather eggs, seeing you laugh at Mrs. Henderson's stories, listening to you talk about your dreams for the future, none of that feels convenient to me. It feels like the beginning of something I've never had before. Elena felt her heart begin to race. What kind of something? Thomas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. The kind that makes a man think about the future differently. The kind that makes him want to be better than he is. For a moment, Elena thought he might kiss her. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, and she found herself swaying slightly toward him, but then Thomas stepped back, running a hand through his hair in apparent frustration. I should let you decide what you want, he said roughly, without pressure from me or anyone else. Thomas, the cattle drive starts tomorrow. I'll be gone for a few days. He looked away from her, toward the mountains in the distance. When I come back, maybe you'll have a better idea of how you feel about all this. That evening, they sat on the porch as usual, but the comfortable companionship of previous nights was replaced by a tension that neither of them seemed to know how to address. Elena found herself acutely aware of Thomas's presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the scent of soap and leather that clung to his clothes, the way his hands moved as he spoke. When she finally excused herself to go to bed, Thomas caught her hand as she rose from her chair. Elena. His voice was soft, uncertain. What Peter said today, about you having options, he's not wrong. If you want to leave, if this isn't what you hoped for, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. No questions asked. Elena looked down at their joined hands, Thomas's large and calloused from work, hers small and pale in comparison. The contact sent warmth spreading up her arm, and she realized with startling clarity that the last thing she wanted was to leave this place. This man who had shown her more kindness and respect than she had ever known. And if I want to stay? Thomas's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Then we'll figure out what that means together. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. When she finally pulled her hand free and went upstairs, she could feel Thomas watching her go. That night, she lay awake in the narrow bed, thinking about Peter Morrison's words and Thomas's response. She had come to Montana expecting to trade her old life for a new form of security. But somewhere along the way, security had become something else entirely. She was falling in love with Thomas Mitchell, and the realization both exhilarated and terrified her. When she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled with brown eyes and gentle hands, and the promise of a future she was afraid to want too much. Elena spent the first day of Thomas's absence trying to keep herself busy with household tasks, but by the second day, she found herself restless and anxious. Mrs. Henderson had gone to visit her sister in town, leaving Elena alone on the ranch for the first time since her arrival. The silence felt oppressive after becoming accustomed to the comfortable rhythm of shared conversation and daily routines. On the third evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Elena heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart leaped, thinking Thomas had returned early. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Peter Morrison's familiar silhouette. Elena rose quickly and stepped toward the door, but Peter's voice stopped her. "Don't run away, Elena. I just want to talk." "Thomas told you not to come here," Elena said, her hand on the door handle. Peter dismounted and walked closer, his hands raised in what was meant to be a reassuring gesture. "Thomas isn't here, is he? And I have something important to tell you." Despite her discomfort, Elena found herself curious. "What?" "What? I was in town today and heard some interesting news. About your husband-to-be." Peter's voice carried a note of satisfaction that made Elena's stomach tighten with dread. "What kind of news?" "The kind that might change how you feel about your arrangement." Peter stepped onto the porch, and Elena backed toward the door. "Did Thomas ever tell you about his first wife?" Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "His what?" "Ah, I can see he didn't." Peter's smile was cold and triumphant. "Her name was Sarah. Pretty little thing, not unlike yourself. They married about 5 years ago." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask Mrs. Henderson when she gets back. Ask anyone in town." Peter leaned against the porch railing, clearly enjoying Elena's distress. "Sarah died in childbirth less than a year after their wedding. The baby died too." Elena's legs felt weak, and she gripped the door frame for support. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, not because Thomas had been married before, but because he had never mentioned it. She thought of all their evening conversations, all the stories they had shared about their pasts, and realized how carefully he had edited his own history. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Thomas isn't looking for love, Elena. He's looking for a replacement, someone to fill the hole Sarah left behind." Peter's voice softened with false sympathy. "You'll always be second choice, living in the shadow of a dead woman." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Peter Morrison. "Get off this property. Now, I'm only trying to help you see the truth before you make a mistake you can't undo." Peter straightened and adjusted his hat. "My offer still stands. Elena, you don't have to settle for being someone's consolation prize." After Peter rode away, Elena sank down onto the porch steps, her mind reeling. The knowledge that Thomas had been married before didn't shock her. Many people lost spouses to illness or accident on the frontier. What hurt was his silence about it. She had shared the most painful parts of her past with him, trusting him with memories she had never spoken aloud. While he had kept this fundamental piece of his history hidden, she spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her tangled emotions. Was Peter right? Was she merely a substitute for the woman Thomas had truly loved? The thought made her feel hollow and foolish, as if she had been playing a part in someone else's story without realizing it. When Thomas returned the following evening, Elena was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Henderson prepare supper. She heard the sound of his horse in the yard and felt her heart leap involuntarily, followed immediately by a wave of confusion and hurt. Through the window, she watched him unsaddle his horse and tend to the animal with his usual careful attention. He looked tired but content, and when he glanced toward the house, she saw him smile. Mrs. Henderson noticed Elena's strange mood immediately. "What's wrong, dear? You've been quiet as a church mouse since I got back from town." "Mrs. Henderson," Elena said carefully, "did Thomas ever tell you that he had been married before?" The older woman's hand stilled on the dish she was drying. "Oh, child. Who told you about Sarah?" "Peter Morrison came by while you were gone." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Is it true?" Mrs. Henderson set down the dish and turned to face Elena fully. "Yes, it's true. Thomas was married to Sarah for about 10 months before she died, trying to birth their child. Why didn't he tell me?" Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because it still hurts him to talk about it, I suppose. And because he didn't want you to think you were competing with a ghost." The kitchen door opened, and Thomas stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of horses and autumn air. His face lit up when he saw Elena, and he moved toward her as if to embrace her. But something in her expression stopped him short. "Elena, what's wrong? I need to ask you something," Elena said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "And I need you to tell me the truth." Thomas glanced between Elena and Mrs. Henderson, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "All right. Were you married before?" The question hung in the air between them. Thomas's face went pale, and Elena saw something that might have been pain flash across his features before he nodded slowly. "Yes. Her name was Sarah. Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the gesture revealing his distress. "Because I didn't know how. Because every time I started to bring it up, I worried you'd think I was still in love with her memory. Are you?" The question came out sharper than Elena had intended, but she needed to know the answer. Thomas was quiet for so long that she thought he might not respond. "I loved Sarah," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of loving someone else." Elena felt her composure beginning to crack. "How can I know that? How can I know that when you look at me, you're not seeing her?" "Because you're nothing like her," Thomas said, and Elena flinched as if he had struck her. "I see." Elena's voice was cold now. Protective. "So I'm nothing like the woman you actually chose to love." "That's not what I meant." Thomas stepped toward her, but Elena backed away. "Elena, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I understand perfectly." Elena's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. "I'm convenient, just like Peter said. A practical solution to your problems. Peter Morrison was here? While you were gone, yes. He told me the truth you couldn't bring yourself to share." Thomas's expression darkened with anger. "He had no right. He had no right to tell me that my future husband had been married before? That I'm just a replacement for someone else? Christ, you're not a replacement for anyone," Thomas said fiercely. "You're Elena. You're funny and brave and stubborn. And you make this place feel alive in ways it hasn't for years." "Pretty words," Elena said bitterly. "But words are cheap, aren't they?" Thomas stared at her for a moment, then turned and strode toward the door. "I need some air." Elena watched him go, her heart breaking with each step he took away from her. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat delicately. "You're making a mistake, child." "Am I? How can you be so sure?" "Because I knew Sarah, and I know you, and I can see the difference in how Thomas looks at the two of you." Mrs. Henderson began putting away the dishes with brisk efficiency. Sarah was a sweet girl, but she was fragile. Always needed taking care of. Always worried about something. Thomas protected her because that's what she needed. And what do I need? You don't need protecting, Elena. You need partnership. And that's something Thomas never had with Sarah, because she couldn't give it. Mrs. Henderson fixed Elena with a direct look. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. That evening, Elena sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the growing chill. Thomas had not returned to the house for supper, and she had seen him working in the barn long after the usual hour. She wanted to go to him, but pride and uncertainty held her back. She was still sitting there when she heard his footsteps on the wooden boards behind her. "May I join you?" Elena nodded without turning around. Thomas settled into the chair beside her, and they sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "Her favorite color was yellow," Thomas said suddenly. "Sarah's. She always wore yellow ribbons in her hair. She was afraid of storms and loved butterflies, and could sing like an angel." He paused. "You want to know about her? So I'm telling you." Elena turned to look at him, surprised by the directness of his approach. She was gentle and kind, and she would have made a wonderful mother if she'd lived long enough. Thomas's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I grieved for her for a long time, maybe longer than I should have." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that loving someone who's gone doesn't mean I can't love someone who's here." Thomas met her eyes directly. "When I wrote to that agency, I was looking for someone to help me run this ranch and maybe ease the loneliness." "That's true." Elena felt her heart sink, but Thomas continued. "But what I found was something I didn't even know I was missing. Sarah needed me to take care of her. And I did. But you—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "You challenge me, Elena. You make me think differently about things I thought I had figured out. When you laugh, it's not because you think you should, but because something genuinely delights you. When you're angry, you say so instead of hiding it behind pretty smiles." Thomas reached for her hand, and this time Elena didn't pull away. "I loved Sarah, but I was never myself with her. I was who she needed me to be. With you, I can just be Thomas. Flaws and all." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. "How can I believe that? How do I know you won't change your mind when the novelty wears off?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I suppose you can't know for certain. Love always requires a leap of faith. I don't know if I'm brave enough for that kind of leap." "You crossed an ocean to start a new life with a man you'd never met," Thomas said softly. "You're the bravest person I know." Elena turned to study his face in the dim light from the house windows. She saw sincerity there, and something else that made her pulse quicken. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his cheek. "Elena," Thomas whispered, and before she could lose her courage, she leaned forward and kissed him. The contact was soft and tentative at first, but Thomas responded immediately, his free hand coming up to cup her face. The kiss deepened, and Elena felt something fierce and desperate unfurl in her chest. All the loneliness and fear of the past weeks seemed to pour out of her at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thomas rested his forehead against hers. His eyes closed. "I need you to know something," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. It terrifies me." Thomas opened his eyes and looked at her with such tenderness that Elena felt her last defenses crumble. "Elena," he said, and kissed her again, more gently this time. When he pulled back, Elena caught his face between her hands, her eyes bright with tears and something that might have been panic. "If you kiss me once more, I'll break," she whispered. "I've spent so many years protecting myself from hope, and you're making me hope for things I never thought I could have." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then smiled with such warmth that Elena felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening after being locked for years. "Then maybe it's time to break," he said softly, and kissed her again. This time, Elena didn't fight the feeling. She let herself break open to the possibility of love, of partnership, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. When they finally separated, she was crying. But for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in the little white church in Cedar Falls, wearing Mrs. Henderson's wedding dress altered to fit her smaller frame. Thomas waited at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, witnessed by Mrs. Henderson, the Morrisons, and a handful of other neighbors who had welcomed Elena into their community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that made Elena's knees weak. As they walked back down the aisle together, Elena caught Peter Morrison's eye and saw something that might have been respect in his expression. He inclined his head slightly in her direction, and she realized that he had perhaps done her an inadvertent favor by forcing the truth into the open. That night, in the house that was now truly their home, Elena and Thomas lay together as husband and wife for the first time. Thomas was gentle and patient, understanding that despite her bravery in other areas, physical intimacy was new and somewhat frightening to Elena. He took his time, whispering endearments and reassurances until she relaxed in his arms. Afterwards, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Elena traced patterns on Thomas's chest with her fingertip. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Writing to that agency, bringing me here?" Thomas caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Never." "Do you regret answering my letter?" Elena considered the question seriously. She thought about the girl who had stepped off the train in Cedar Falls just a few weeks ago, frightened, desperate, and expecting nothing more than basic safety. That girl could never have imagined the depth of feeling that now filled her heart. "No," she said finally. "I regret a lot of things in my life. But not this. Never this." Thomas pulled her closer, and Elena settled against him with a contentment she had never thought possible. Outside their window, an owl called softly in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully in their pastures. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself to believe, finally and completely, that she had found her home.